pig insulin, for example, that was used before to treat the people who suffer from diabetes. So that was something rather extraordinary. And they started to write a paper. That's a normal reaction of scientists. The universities said, oh, stop. We want to patent. We want to have money from that. You can get a lot of money from that. And they discussed, and they went to a compromise. Cohen and Boyer said, okay, we will patent and we will delay our publication for 1 year, which is needed if you want the patent to be accepted. But no exclusivity, contrary to what, for example, Derivative genetics has always done. No exclusivity. The license will be available for anybody prepared to pay for it, and we don't want that the fee should be too high, because we want to disseminate as largely as possible. Roughly, the universities ask for free, and they compromise on money. And much more interesting, not for profit, research institutes and universities will pay nothing. That's the best use of a patent, traditional patent system you can do. Of course, it was not necessary to have incentives for them. They have incentives of a different nature. But to disseminate the technique and to reinvest what they earn as royalties, it was excellent. Nobody was deterred. The universities could go free, and the universities and the inventors got $50 million at least. Cohen invested in a house because it was a pure academic. He didn't want to do anything else but work in his lab. Boyer was a kind of entrepreneur. He invested money with a financial firm, and they created a startup in biotech. And the startup became Genentech, the second largest biotech in the world. It seems that it's a good system, it works. Well, not good. Monsanto wanted to do more than put a gene in a bacteria. Why? Because they needed a further step. They needed to put the bacteria in a plant. The basic idea can be illustrated in the following way. You have a white plant, let's say tropical, which is of no use and cannot be of any use. It's not edible. It cannot be used for just manufacturing clothes and so on. But it is remarkably resistant to drought. You take the gene or the genes from the plant which control that resistance to drought. You put them in a bacteria. That's the Boyer-Cohen method. But after that, you take the transformed bacteria and you put it in a plant which is not resistant to drought, but which is very important for agriculture, a strain of rice, for example, which becomes resistant to drought. Good example of an effort to a more sustainable society and economy. The problem is that you can't just take any bacteria. Even a bacteria which is good for the first step might not be good for the second. You must have a bacterium which has a propensity, when put in the plant to which you want to pass the property, it must have a propensity to give the genes to a plant. And only one bacterium could do the job. And that bacterium was covered by, of course, a patent a patent that has been never licensed of Monsanto. And here you observe the worst effect of monopoly. If monopoly charges higher prices, okay, we are not very happy, but it's not the end of the world. If a monopoly freezes a technique on which it has a patent, that can be very serious. In the case of Monsanto, they applied the technique to, for example, transforming corn into corn resistant to its own pesticide. It was never, because it was not profitable at the time, it was never interested to develop, to use the technique to develop plants which might be more resistant to drought, or also more resistant to salinity. It was not done, it was technically possible. They had the knowledge, they controlled and they contained knowledge, which is an excellent counterexample to what Susan Scotchman recommended. It happened that in February 2005, I very much remember because I saw the paper and I was quite astonished to read it. A team of biochemists from Australia and Belgium working together published a paper in Nature, and that paper revealed that they have been able to identify a complete family of bacteria which could do the job. And fortunately, these bacteria were of a biological structure sufficiently different from the Monsanto one not to infringe the Monsanto patent. What could happen? They could patent. And what would you have? You would have a duopoly instead of a monopoly. And we economists, we know that with sufficient tacit collusion, a duopoly is not that much different from a monopoly. They decided to go open source. They published the list. They allowed everybody, and especially the institute in developing countries, I think especially the Rice Institute in the Philippines, they allowed them to use it. As in any open source contract, any modification, improvement should be put open source as well. Else, you go to court and they would never win against such a contract. If you want to use the technology to, for example, improve the sorghum in some African country, you might do that on a commercial basis. You might find the product in the terms of Schumpeter that can be protected in the traditional sense of patent protection. But anybody in the world, any institute in a developing country can use the nature paper and the know-how they are prepared to share to develop products which are important for their own people, for their own economy and society. So you have traditional intellectual property, very efficient in some cases, very detrimental in other cases. Largely before you patent something you shouldn't patent the bacteria. And you have a new avenue which seems no longer to be confined to computing. And these are possibilities that can be practically implemented. These are possibilities which can subvert without having a direct conflict the system which prevails now. In that sense, they are good promises to uses of intellectual property protection for boosting innovations that might be of more than just commercial interests in